Hi, my name is Rich and we're Consumer Hub, and this is the FMCG Podcast where we talk to the leaders of today and hear their stories of how you can develop as a leader. Today on the show, we've got Joel Barlow. Really excited to have him as a guest. He is a category marketing leader with a great background across brand and private label within chilled food categories. Well, let's get straight to it. Now, that's one of the reasons we're really excited to get Joel on the show, because Joel's got a really good background training and developing people and very much investing in category management as a discipline across the sector. So it'll be a really good show today in understanding how category as a discipline is moving forwards. But look, in a nutshell, I just wanted to kick the show off with a quick question, Joel. What is the point in category management and what's it all about?
It's a really good question. And you see, I guess, what category management is seen quite different in different organizations and what that means to people. But from myself personally, it's about getting that sweet spot between kind of category, shopper, and consumer. And actually, if we genuinely do the right thing across all three, then actually indirectly we will see sustainable growth. We will see profitable wins, because actually if we're doing the right thing based on where the data and the insights telling us across that category, shopper and consumer, then actually the output should be successful business and strong partnerships across our retailer base.
Yeah, brilliant. It's interesting to hear you emphasise all three categories there. You know, hopefully if the category team do their bit right, then everyone gets a bit of a win, don't they?
I think so, and it's about continuing to champion that. In all honesty, that's as equally as important as doing, I guess, that good job and that good kind of thorough fundamental role, but actually championing that and making sure it remains at the heart of decision making, because naturally challenges always arise, whether it's kind of supply chain or a business or financial implications of doing something. But I think it's important that we always try and start with what does the category best case scenario look like. And if we start there without any of those caveats of, well, can we do it, can't we do it, let's start with the best picture and then work back from that, as opposed to putting kind of barriers in place before we've even kind of seen whether we can do something or not.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, that leads nicely into my next question, because you've alluded there to the fact that, you know, category really needs to underpin the strategy of a business so that you're adding value to everybody in the product area that you're playing in. But lots of businesses that I work with, especially SMEs coming through, they tend to invest in category very, very late on in their growth curve, which always surprises me. Like, why do you think that is? Why do you think it takes businesses quite a while to really appreciate the value of category in their kind of journey, in their growth?
It's a really good question, and I do see similar, like I said, whether that's category are brought into the fold a bit later on, or just naturally, given the nature of SMEs, maybe there's just naturally smaller category team or fewer people doing lots of different things. I guess the important thing is that actually it's a function that you genuinely have to, I guess, invest in to reap the rewards. And there's also, I guess, a reality that buying data, buying market epos, kind of tapping into different insights, it can be quite a costly process to undertake. So I guess there are always financial implications from that side of things as well. And depending on the view that you take on category and kind of establishing, well, what does the ROI look like on a category department? I think that's also a really important thing to do as well, because naturally with kind of sales and commercial and finance, there are quite clear KPIs, whether it's from a profit and loss perspective, whereas category, it challenges you to think a little bit broader, because not everything is always as tangible as something like that, whether it's building strategic relationships, unlocking an innovation agenda and a pipeline, and helping to secure long kind of 3-5 year deals that I guess unfortunately category maybe to some extent has to prove its worth a little bit more sometimes in organizations.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, that leads really nicely into the next question I've got, which what does good category management look like? Because that's interesting, thinking about the ROI and category being sort of less clear in how it links back to the actual exercise. Obviously, there's a big cost implication. And there is that temptation just to see it as a cost center rather than the profit center. How do you create a culture of good category management where a company sees it as a profit center and sees it as part of the commercial output of a business rather than just a cost?
I think from my perspective, kind of good category management starts with quite a clear I guess, process. So there are multiple different iterations of what that looks like. I've seen an 8-step category management process. We tend to use a bit more of a kind of a consolidated view on actually defining the market in which we're playing. What does that look like? Kind of looking at the discovery element, getting all those category insights together, and then starting to develop a plan, whether that's NPD, our innovation pipeline, what we're going to do from an activation, ranging, distribution perspective. And then the final one is deploy. So how do we execute that in the market? And good category management to me is following a principle like that, so that we're starting with establishing the market in which we're playing. What are some of those challenges that we face into? Are they challenges that we can address? Then how do we do that? Through the marketing mix, essentially. So we can't necessarily touch price, but place, promotion, product. What does that look like? And how can we deploy those levers for incremental growth? So I think good category management is getting back to some of those basics. And it's about doing the basics brilliantly, to be honest, because there's a lot of advantage to be had there. But I guess the important element is showcasing how that can deliver incrementality for the business in question. And actually, once, say, a business is on a sustainable, profitable footing, actually, maybe it's got kind of long-term contracts that are tied down, but actually it could be that category management element, which really is that cherry on the top. So how can you go a level above that? So how can you tap into some of those insights to look like what the 3, 5, 10-year horizon looks like? And then how can we work with all the other functions to bring something to fruition? Because as we know, some things are so far out that it may require the foresight of people sitting within category management to understand what does the long-term trends look like and how can we create solutions in that space.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So you've got very much a wide-angle view that you're kind of linking into action, and it's kind of being able to bounce between those two different kind of angles or viewpoints, I guess, which adds a lot of value to the process.
I think so, and some of it is down to the nature of the business as well. So I guess naturally, working in a dairy business, that things can take time to come to fruition, whether it's kind of capex to get that signed off, or building factories, capabilities, and that actually you need that foresight to be able to look further into the future. What is the shopper of the future going to look like? Where are the channel trends going? And then you're constantly trying to keep on the front foot by preempting what that looks like to get the business in an agile and dynamic place to be able to get there. Because as we see in many different industries, if you're not going into that next space and there's a void, someone else will fill it. Someone else within the set will fill it. So it's really keen that, yes, we do have kind of 12 to 18 months locked down. But like you said, we need to switch between the two views and ensure that we're constantly having our finger on the pulse of what's going on.
I always think it's interesting. I've been in FMCG for 10 years, and you see categories go in cycles. And one thing that I've noticed is categories that seem the most stable, with maybe 2 or 3 core categories, 2 or 3 core brands, hardly any change. They're nearly always the ones that are ripe for disruptor activity. And they seem sort of so impenetrably static. And then 18 months later, you think, oh, what's happened? A great example that everyone knows is the beer market, isn't it? You go back 10 years ago, nothing was really happening in beer. It was boring. Then there's ale, then there's craft. It all comes through. And, it's really interesting. And I was chatting with a category guy once, and a brand insights manager, and he said, if we don't innovate, the competition will do. So my job is to make sure we get there first, which I thought was a really kind of snappy way to sum it up. But how do you see? Because a lot of companies, they sort of they call category different things, and some companies chop it in half in trade activation and shopper, and then brand insight if they're all brand. Other companies, if they've got a mix of brand and private label, it all sits within category. It can be quite nebulous. Do you think that category as a discipline sort of changes depending on whether you're more brand or private label, or what product sector you're in, or do you feel like it's more is it quite consistent in how it should be viewed by a business as a tool and a resource?
It's a fantastic question. And to be honest, I guess, as I spoke about a little bit earlier on, I guess the category management principles of kind of the category, the shopper, the consumer, and that process I kind of outlined of developing the insights, discovering them, looking and how you're going to deploy them, what the opportunities, that kind of arguably kind of stays the same, but the responsibilities, how that's brought to fruition, who manages what, and the complexity of the team massively changes business by business. And even the couple of businesses that I've been in have all approached it slightly differently, given the makeup of that brand private label split, maybe the nature of the market in which they're operating in. So I've been in businesses where there may be a separate insight function. So you may have a head of insight and innovation, and they kind of detract that and have a little bit of a separate focus on there. You may have companies that are more brand related. So there's a more heavier focus on trade marketing, shopper activation. There's a lot more above the line communication and comms there. So I guess the process and the heart of what makes good category management should arguably stay as is. It's just about maybe how that's executed. And the scale in which the business is operating as well. Many SMEs may have a couple of individuals who they're the insight manager, they're also the shopper activation expert, they're also in brand marketing. I guess that's just the nature of some of those industries.
Right. Okay. No, that's really interesting. Kind of linking back to what you were saying about the stakeholder engagement piece being really core.
Yeah.
Category demonstrating its value in the company.
Yeah.
Flipping that round, like if you're in another function, how can you leverage insight and category as a function to get the most out of what you do? Because it's always interesting. I do a lot of like commercial supply chain recruitment as well.
Yeah.
And often if you're not in like core sales or core innovation, sometimes what the category guys are doing is kind of a bit removed. You don't necessarily have those interactions. But then I will also notice other companies that are really good at making sure that all of their guys that have some kind of touch point with the customer, they also get touch point with insights as well. And that's very noticeable in the culture it creates. How can you develop that kind of approach in a business? And what do you think are some of the untapped areas people don't necessarily have front of mind as much as they should do?
I think on category, particularly from kind of my personal perspective as well, is actually it's opening up those lines of communication and not making kind of category a dark art of sorts. It's actually making it highly accessible, whether that's in how we communicate from a performance perspective and how we open up some of those lines of communications directly with our retailers. So it could be that traditional relationships maybe with the category and the buying team, but for example, how can we open that up to who looks after their range space and display, who looks after merchandising, who runs their marketing content, and actually opening up those channels so that category has a greater influence and a greater kind of sphere of footprint with the people that we're engaging with in the respective other organisations.
Yeah, and so do you think it's partly down to category to go and kind of stump up that support internally and go and kind of be their own advocates?
I think so to some extent. It has to be. We have to be our own public relations of sorts to make sure that actually it is as accessible as possible, because there may just be reports may get sent out, and as we know, there's lots of kind of category terminology, and unless we're directly engaging internally and externally with the various stakeholders, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming to open up a category report, to open up a category deck or category strategy, and to kind of distill what's important there. So I think it is about being really open and really transparent, and making sure that we're getting the information in the right way for the right levels of the organisation.
Yeah. That's a really good point for anyone listening. I think just as a recruiter, the best category managers I meet, they're really good at selling as well. You know, it's always a bit of a misnomer that, you know, category guys are analysts, and I just don't think that's fair. I think category guys, it's much more commercial, isn't it, than people sometimes pigeonhole the function as.
I think so. No, I couldn't agree more. And I guess depending on where certain industries are or the way certain organisations tap into category management, but for example, when I first started out in category management, I was working for a company that really put category at the heart of kind of corporate decision making, and it was almost like at the time commercial was looking at kind of the profitable execution of that. So category were really kind of leading the way on future direction, and then the focus from the business was, well, if that's the right thing to do, and that's where the market is moving, how can we execute that profitably? And it really put category to the forefront of the business in regards to future innovation, acquisitions, where should we be going in terms of our direction of travel. So it's one of those functions that can be treated very differently in various organizations, and the role it plays from a strategic element.
Yeah. What I just wanted to kind of drill into your kind of category expertise within Chilled, Joel. Like Chilled is so fast paced, and often, you know, a report that's retrospective on an annual basis is too slow. How do you ensure that you're getting that live feed of insight that informs the now as a fast-paced category, but also keeps you looking to the wide angle picture that you've discussed there and gives you that long-term foresight?
The key thing there for me has been kind of ensuring that there is a strong frequency of ways of interacting, whether that's having monthly presentations, monthly reviews, monthly scorecards with our respective retailers, and making sure that we're constantly driving those channels of communication internally as well. So COVID has fundamentally shifted so many market dynamics. It's really shone light on category management, and I get the impression that's happened in various businesses in various ways, that actually markets that we maybe kind of previously thought were fairly flat and comfortable to some extent have been massively accelerated in many instances. So it's critical that we keep really close to those developments, because they can have a number of consequences if we don't. So I think it's been really important that the frequency of our interaction, we're getting it right, because like you said, a biannual, annual report wash up in certain areas just doesn't cut it and isn't timely enough to make agile and quite dynamic decisions. So
of course. Obviously, you alluded to scorecards there, which is increasingly a kind of a very key way that people are benchmarking health and delivery within a category. What do you think goes into a good category scorecard? Like, how would you kind of approach that?
I think there'll always be the basics in there. I guess you're going to want to be tracking value and volume, but even on some of those basics as well, what are the time periods we're looking at? It can't just be year on year anymore, because if we're talking year on year, we're going to feel the annualization of COVID for quite a significant amount of time. So it could be year on years are massively inflated, deflated, maybe aren't accurately representing where the category health is. So what does post versus prior look like? What does now versus 2 years ago look like? Are categories benchmarking higher or lower versus pre-pandemic? So there's always those consistent measures, but how are we actually looking at them? Because if we're not careful, having a very isolated, singular view may not be a true reflection of where we actually are. And then there are all the other various things from a shopper KPI perspective, whether that's penetration, frequency, average weighted purchase, and even stuff like average RSP. So actually, where is that moving within the market? Are we seeing shopper inflation kind of coming through, and what does that look like? And then I guess other ones, well, distribution, for example, is a really key metric, which again needs to be kept a really close eye on. So have we seen the impact of reductions in facings and distribution points? What are the implications of that? So a good scorecard is all encompassing of a number of those measures over various timeframes, but then it's pulling out the actionable so what's. Because if you have an all singing, all dancing, fantastic scorecard, but it isn't delivering those punchy and succinct so what's, the implications for the business, what should we do next? Is it a challenge that we need to overcome? Is it something that's really good that's happening that we need to leverage and capitalize on to continue? I think it's about pulling out those really succinct so what's that can be communicated very clearly, whether that's to a buyer, to senior stakeholders across different businesses, different functions internally within a company like ours. And it's really important to be able to do that.
So kind of almost one of the key skills in the scorecard isn't so much as what you put into it, so much as how you curate it, edit it, and sort of set the context of that story that you're telling.
I think so. It's that delivery of it, whether that is a delivery via an email, which is punchy and straight to the point, and whether that's been passionately presenting it to various key stakeholders to get those points across. Because like you said, the content of a good scorecard will only really get you so far. It's about opening up that understanding of it, and people understand, well, actually, what are the implications for my business? So what decisions should I make off the back of this scorecard that you've presented to me?
What are some of the key sort of challenges and developments you're seeing in dairy at the moment? For people that are interested in dairy as a category, they're moving through their careers and they're thinking, right, it's a massive part of the industry. Dairy alt's massive, provenance is massive, but other than the obvious stuff, like what are some of the key things that you're finding are shaping stuff post-pandemic?
I think there are a number of behaviours which significantly shifted the dial on a number of categories. So we operate within milk and cream and butter and spreads and stuff like that. And actually, pre-pandemic, a number of these kind of big categories were fairly flat to negligible decline. So maybe kind of 1 or 2% decline in a number of areas. Because the thing is, when a category gets to say 98, 99% penetration, which a number of these categories are, because they're almost in every 28 million UK household, that actually the levers for growth can become a little bit more difficult to achieve. But we saw kind of from that March 2020 last year onwards, a significant shift in some of the consumption and behaviors in some of these key categories, whether that was a increase in at-home cooking and baking, more working from home, for example, people actually getting a broader repertoire and being more comfortable in the kitchen, which actually taps into different more occasions. The thing is now that even though there is a shift back to a level of normality, whatever that looks like for various people, there's still been a number of kind of sticky behaviors that have stuck around within the background. So yes, categories are starting to return back to some levels of normality, but what does that look like versus pre-pandemic? And in a number of categories, it's significantly different. We take a category like cream, for example. Pre-pandemic, a couple of percentage points decline. It's starting to slow now versus last year, but versus 2019, it's 10% ahead, because a number of those behaviors have remained within the category. And once people do become more comfortable, for example, with a wider repertoire of different recipes from a cooking and baking perspective, it taps into the versatility of a product like cream. So then the focus now shifts to, well, how can we continue some of those behaviors? How can we help with some of those behaviors, whether it's creating more convenient pack sizes? What does it look like from an activation and comms perspective? Should we be looking at leveraging kind of cross-category activation with some of the other relevant categories to cream, like eggs and the cooking and baking and the sorts like that? So I think the pandemic has turned the dial on a number of those KPIs, and actually how we now relook at some of those category opportunities. It's stuff like knowing that. So if people are becoming more comfortable, how can we continue to accelerate that? And there are so many kind of levers I spoke about at our disposal, whether that's across product, place, and promotion. Actually, we need to recognize those behaviors and then understand actually how can we continue to maybe protect and accelerate them.
And just thinking about kind of talent that's coming through and wanting to move into category. I mean, category is one of these disciplines that I think, if you get a chance, everyone should have a rotation into, because it makes you so much stronger. So many great commercial directors I know have done a rotation in insights or some kind of like category-driven discipline at some point. What advice would you have for somebody that's sort of looking at building a career in insights and category within food and drink?
I think for me, it would be like you said, that irrespective of potentially what that much longer term horizon looks like in terms of goals, kind of 5-10 years down the line, it's recognizing that actually the versatility of a category manager is so varied that actually it's a great place to own those skill sets. It's significantly analytical from a data perspective, but it's also highly creative, and it's such a nice hybrid of those two maybe different mindsets, different ways of working, that actually, like you said, it has something for everyone. So even if the long-term aspiration is more from a commercial and financial perspective, actually category management is a really great place to get into the data. How do we turn that into insights, the storytelling nature of it? But whereas someone if wants to, maybe the longer term picture is more from a brand marketing perspective, actually category is still a fantastic place to hone those skills in. So I think, like you said, it's somewhere which I would strongly encourage everyone to think about as part of their future kind of career aspirations. Actually, it's a great place for anyone, and it's quite an all-encompassing style role.
And just in terms of the social smarts and I guess character qualities that people can work on and shape that are outside of the technical skill set of category management, like what sort of personal qualities do you think that a marketing leader should be working on to become the best they can be in that category space?
For me personally, it's a true passion for the category in which someone is potentially operating in, because like you said, there are competencies, whether it's from an analytical perspective, helping with business presentations and storytelling, but it's often quite hard, I guess, to instill that passion, that enthusiasm and that proactivity towards being a good category manager, because you're constantly having your finger on the pulse of what's going on. So you're looking wider outside of the UK. What's going on in Europe? What's going on elsewhere from a global perspective that maybe has implications for yourself within category management, and how can you start to think further afield? So for me personally, there are kind of core competencies as such, which maybe does make a good category manager, whether that's analytical, storytelling, presenting. But for me personally, it's that passion, that proactivity, which I think is really key for differentiating between good and great.
That's interesting. Yeah, which, like I say, goes above and beyond just the day job, doesn't it? It's having a genuine interest in what's happening within your vertical across other areas, whether it's Europe or, other channels that you maybe not focused on.
I think so, but again, even in the context of the UK, like it's thinking about so much bigger than just that category. So yes, dairy is a significant category, but what's going on wider across the rest of the store? Are they learning some beer, wines, and spirits? What are their corporate comms? What's the retailer CSR agenda? It's thinking about everything and not just having maybe a singular, isolated view, which is, well, I'm the category manager on dairy, so I'll only speak to the retailer about dairy, because then the conversations will only ever remain within the sphere of dairy. But there could be so much bigger things that you could be tapping into in wider discussions by thinking so much bigger than just the piece of the pie in which we play. So
okay.
I think that broad mindset is really important.
And are there any resources that you kind of benefited from? Any courses, books, podcasts, other than this one, obviously, goes without saying. What would you recommend people look at for their own sort of personal development?
Do you know, it's a really good question. There are so many resources out there, whether it's paid for resources, whether it's kind of the likes of subscriptions to IGD, the Grocer, Mintel, and the various shoppers kind of resources like that. But for me as well, there are so many great publicly available data sources that, again, it may sound a little boring, but even like the Office of National Statistics, for example, there are fantastic resources available there from government bodies where it's about talking about, well, what does the future composition of household sizes look like? Is the population getting younger or older? And what do the various iterations look like? That actually, there's so much fantastic information at our fingertip there. And information like that has a big bearing on the future in which we'll be operating in 10, 15 years' time, for example. So it's about getting the data from multiple different places and from multiple sources so that you can build a really kind of coherent and compelling view of the world.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. No, well, thanks so much for all those insights, Joel. Really, really appreciated. I've learned something today, and I hope everyone else has as well. And guys, if you've enjoyed today, do make sure to reach out to Joel. Just let him know that you appreciate his insights. Give him a follow on LinkedIn, and make sure you follow the FMCG podcast too and share it with your friends. Guys, thank you so much for listening. It's been great to have you on the show, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Check out the playlist here for more content like this. Click the donuts to subscribe so you never miss an update, and give us a like and a comment so we know what content you'd like to see from us. See you next time.